Hello and welcome to another episode of Threat Update. I'm Kilian Englert, and joining me as usual is Ryan O'Boyle. Ryan, how's it going today?
Hey, Kilian, doing well. Thanks for having me on.
Awesome. Thanks for being on again. So we have an interesting one to talk about today. I know we spend a lot of time talking about attacks that could affect the availability, for example, of data like ransomware, where if it gets encrypted, of course, it's not available. But today we wanted to talk about a different type of availability attack. So a lot of people probably watching saw the news that there was a foiled plot or incident to disrupt the functionality of an AWS or an Amazon data center. And that got us thinking, what would happen if a major data center like that went down? I know there have been some instances in the past where power outages or different things have affected it, which have caused a myriad of problems with internet services. But that got us thinking, for the availability factor, because so many organizations are building their infrastructure or their services or their software on a cloud platform, and it's widely adopted, and again, people really are taking to this, and it's fantastic. But what would happen if something like that went down? Whose responsibility would it be to make sure that the redundancy or the failover is built in?
Yeah, I think it really depends. And I hate
Sure.
giving that answer, but I think it definitely applies in this case.
Yeah.
It's funny, I got a text message early Saturday morning after that article came out and
Right.
was basically like, how would this impact us? And
Right.
we had to kind of sit down and think about that for a second,
Mhm.
because people have a lot of different objects in the cloud and a lot
Right.
of different things. We could be talking about infrastructure, we could be talking about servers, we could be talking about software in the cloud, but we could
Right.
also be talking about things like serverless functions.
Yeah.
So I think it's really important for organizations to kind of take a sit down and look
Mhm.
at what type of objects, what type of infrastructure they
Mhm.
have in the cloud, and how that applies to the shared responsibility model.
Sure.
What are they responsible for securing,
Mhm.
protecting, keeping available, and what is their cloud service provider
Right.
responsible for? Because I think it really depends. I think it's very easy for us to make assumptions that we move something to the cloud.
Right.
If a data center were to go down,
Mhm.
we're covered, right? It's not our responsibility anymore because we've moved
Right.
that infrastructure to the cloud. But it's not always the case, especially even things like serverless functions.
Right.
It's really easy to assume that we're covered there, but oftentimes when we're architecting these systems,
Mhm.
we need to build them resiliently. We need to have
Yeah.
redundancy in place for high availability.
Yeah, absolutely. And just thinking like in the on-prem world, and maybe we'll step back for some of the audience if they're not familiar with these technologies, but in the on-prem world, you have your server in your data center. You would back it up and do those functions. Or if you're using something like a virtualization, sometimes there's built-in functionality where if there's a hardware issue, it can automatically move it or migrate it somewhere else. And the interesting thing with the cloud, I suppose, is just somebody else is hosting the servers for you, more or less. And when you spin it up, I know in AWS, and I'm sure it's the same in the other ones, but you pick a region where you want that to spin up, and you can even spin up just a piece of hardware in their data center, which is a little bit different than the situations with the serverless functions. But and that's the really important question is where what is the configuration for it to get it to migrate or move, and that's something I think that maybe a lot of folks don't take into account. And it's even more abstracted, as you mentioned, Ryan, with the serverless functions, because it's, at least as people, at least for me, I can just picture the server being somewhere else, but the serverless functions are a different type of solution. Anything else you want to add to that? People, things that people can consider or take a look at when they're architecting their solution?
Yeah, most cloud service providers do provide, high-level
Right.
architectural recommendations. So it's always important to look through that documentation. I know sometimes it can be a little bit dry, but it's
Sure.
it's really important to go through and definitely understanding, the shared responsibility model and how it
Yeah.
applies to those specific functions. Because, depending upon your service provider and depending
Right.
upon what you're doing with that service provider, it could change.
Yeah.
You may have different responsibilities for infrastructure in the cloud versus software
Right.
in the cloud, things like that.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot to consider when spinning that up and building your solutions or moving to the cloud. And that's really interesting, and it was a great kind of thought exercise. I'm really happy to hear, of course, that this was foiled. Nothing happened, of course, but it was a kind of a wake up call and an eye opening call that there's a little bit more to it to take into account. So thank you, Ryan. Really appreciate you coming on and working through that. I think hopefully the audience will find that interesting as well too, and maybe that'll give them a little bit more food for thought as they're planning their cloud solution or looking into maybe leveraging that. So as always, thank you all for watching. We really appreciate it. If you enjoyed this content, please consider subscribing to the channel. We have new videos out all the time. Usually on Thursday mornings we're fully live. And if you wouldn't mind giving us a like on YouTube or leaving us a comment, Ryan and I always appreciate those. So thank you all for watching. Thank you, Ryan, for being on. We'll look forward to talking to you again soon. Take care.
All right. Thanks, Kilian.